The winds howled across the plains of Troy, carrying the scent of death and blood. The battlefield, once a place of fierce and honorable combat, was now a graveyard of warriors. Bodies littered the ground, shields lay cracked, and the dust was thick with the echoes of dying men. The mighty Achilles stood in the center of it all, his bronze armor gleaming under the sun, his spear dripping with the blood of fallen Trojans. His rage had become an unstoppable force, fueled by the death of his beloved companion, Patroclus. For days, he had carved a path of destruction through the Trojan ranks, slaying warrior after warrior in his relentless pursuit of vengeance. Hector, the prince of Troy, had paid the ultimate price, his body dragged behind Achilles' chariot in disgrace. But even after avenging Patroclus, Achilles' wrath had not subsided. His thirst for battle remained unquenched, and his hatred for Troy had only grown stronger. He marched toward the city gates, his heart pounding with the desire to see the walls crumble, to witness Troy burn. From the heights of Mount Olympus, the gods watched with divided hearts. Some admired Achilles' skill and strength, marveling at the mortal who had defied fate time and again. Others, however, saw him as a reckless force, a danger to the balance of the world. Among them stood Apollo, the radiant god of archery, prophecy, and the sun. He had long been a protector of Troy, guiding its warriors and shielding them from ruin. Now, as he looked upon the destruction Achilles had wrought, his golden eyes burned with fury. "This cannot continue," Apollo declared, his voice echoing across the halls of Olympus. "Achilles has overstepped his bounds. He slaughters without mercy, defying even the will of the gods. If no one stands against him, Troy will fall before its time." Zeus, seated upon his mighty throne, regarded Apollo with an expression of quiet wisdom. "His fate is already sealed, Apollo. His death is near. The Moirai have spoken." But Apollo clenched his fists, and yet his fury burns too brightly. He threatens to erase the destiny of Troy itself. "If I do not stop him, who will?" With that, Apollo descended from Olympus in a blaze of golden light, his form shifting as he took on the appearance of a mighty warrior, clad in celestial armor. His bow, forged by Hephaestus, shimmered in his hands, its arrows glowing with divine power. He would not stand idly by as Achilles laid waste to Troy. He would fight. Achilles marched forward, his eyes locked on the great gates of Troy. His men followed, but none dared to stand beside him. Such was the force of his rage that even his own allies feared him. The Trojans, battered and broken, had retreated behind the walls, leaving their fallen behind. There was no one left to challenge him, or so he thought. A blinding light erupted before him, and Achilles shielded his eyes as a powerful presence descended from the heavens. When the light faded, there stood a warrior unlike any he had ever seen. His golden armor shimmered like the very sun, his hair a cascade of divine radiance. In his hand, he held a bow that crackled with energy, an arrow already nocked and aimed. Achilles narrowed his eyes. He recognized his presence. "Apollo," he spat, his voice thick with disdain. "So, the coward god finally shows himself." Apollo's expression remained calm, though his gaze was sharp as a blade. "You have gone too far, Achilles. You have defied the order of things. The gods have tolerated your wrath for long enough, but your time of slaughter must end." Achilles laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Spare me your lectures, god of cowards. You hide behind your city, behind weak mortals, striking from the shadows. But now you stand before me, flesh and blood. Tell me, will you fight, or will you flee as you always do?" Apollo's eyes darkened, and without another word, he released his arrow. It flew faster than any mortal could see, a streak of golden light aimed directly at Achilles' heart. But Achilles was no ordinary man. He twisted his body at the last moment, the arrow grazing his shoulder instead of piercing his chest. The impact alone was enough to send him staggering back, a sharp pain burning through his flesh. But he did not fall. Instead, he grinned, "So, the god does bleed," he muttered, gripping his spear tighter. With a roar, Achilles charged. The ground trembled beneath his feet as he closed the distance between them. His spear aimed for Apollo's throat, but the god was faster. With a flicker of movement, he vanished into golden mist, reappearing behind Achilles in an instant. Before the warrior could react, another arrow struck his back, sending him crashing to the ground. Achilles gritted his teeth, forcing himself up. His body ached from the impact, but pain was nothing to him. He had suffered wounds before. This was no different. With a snarl, he turned, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you can stop me, Apollo? I am Achilles. No man, no god, can stand against me." Apollo did not answer. Instead, he raised his hand, and a wave of divine energy surged forward, crashing into Achilles like a tidal wave. The warrior was sent flying backward, slamming into the earth with a force that cracked the very ground beneath him. Dust and debris filled the air, obscuring him from view. For a moment, all was silent. Then, from the cloud of dust, a shadow moved. Slowly, Achilles rose, his armor dented, his body bruised, but his spirit unbroken. His blue eyes gleamed with something almost inhuman. He wiped the blood from his lips and smiled. "Is that the best you can do, god of the sun?" Apollo's expression did not change, but deep within, he felt a flicker of unease. Achilles was not merely a man. He was a force of nature, a warrior born of gods and destined for legend. To defeat him would not be so simple, but Apollo had vowed to stop him, and a god does not break his word. The battle had only begun. The battlefield stood still as Achilles and Apollo faced each other. Dust swirled in the fading sunlight, and the weight of destiny pressed upon them. The gods had long dictated the fate of mortals. Yet Achilles, the greatest warrior of Greece, now stood in open defiance of one. Apollo, radiant and imposing, cast aside his golden bow. A gleaming spear materialized in his grasp, its divine energy pulsing like the heartbeat of Olympus. Achilles tightened his grip on his shield and sword, his breath steady, his gaze unyielding. He knew this battle was beyond any he had fought before, yet he refused to retreat. Apollo struck first. His spear shot forward, faster than the eye could follow, colliding with Achilles' shield in a deafening clash. The force sent shockwaves across the field, knocking soldiers off their feet. Achilles retaliated instantly, thrusting his sword toward the god's chest, but Apollo dissolved into golden mist, reappearing behind him. The battle raged with blinding speed. Each strike shattered the ground beneath them. Each block sent tremors through the air. Achilles moved like a storm, relentless and unyielding. For the first time, Apollo felt resistance from a mortal unlike any before. But the god had no intention of killing Achilles. Fate had already sealed his doom. With a final burst of divine force, Apollo sent Achilles staggering back, his golden presence fading from the battlefield. Then, the fatal arrow came. It was not Apollo who fired it, but Paris, Prince of Troy. A simple arrow, guided by an unseen force, found the only weakness in Achilles' invincible body, his heel. Pain surged through him. His limbs faltered. The great warrior, who had defied gods and conquered men, fell to his knees. The battlefield fell silent. Achilles, the mightiest of the Greeks, had been struck down not by a warrior of legend, but by an arrow of fate. His breath slowed. His vision darkened. The weight of death pressed upon him. Yet his name, his legend, would never fade. From Olympus, Apollo watched in silence. Though he had opposed Achilles, he could not help but respect him. The warrior had defied even the gods, and for that, he would never be forgotten. Achilles' body fell to the dust, but his name would echo through eternity. The end.